Welcome to the Big Idea podcast, where we focus on food. I'm your host, Andrew Ive, and I'm the founder of Big Idea Ventures. So today we're going to be talking to a chap called Ryan Bethencourt. And Ryan is a very old friend. We've known each other now for probably about a decade or so. Sometimes industries have this sort of inflection point where we just kind of create something entirely new and a new way of doing things. And we had that in the computer industry, in Silicon Valley with the Apple guys and other folks, Bill Gates, etc. In my opinion, Ryan may be one of those people in the sort of biotech space. I think in a decade, in 15 years, people like Ryan, and there aren't that many of them, so I'm not sure why I say people like Ryan, but people like Ryan, I think, will be seen and recognized as kind of true visionaries, people who really help to create the next stage of the biotech industry. So I hope I haven't oversold him. I'm a big fan. I love how he thinks, his vision, and a lot of the things he does. His motivations are altruistic. He's very much about making this place better for everyone. So let's listen to our conversation with Ryan Bethencourt. Ryan is currently the CEO of a company called PostWild Earth, but he's had a really interesting commercial background to date. So let's get into the conversation. Love your thoughts and comments at the end of it. Many thanks. Bye. All right. Hey, Ryan, welcome to the Big Idea podcast, where we focus on food. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
This is one conversation I've wanted to, I talk to you all the time, so this is totally not a new thing, but I love the way your mind works. I love the way you think. I kind of love the things you're doing. So I think it's only fair that we share that with other people.
Ditto, Andrew. This is going to be a lot of fun because I love a lot of the things that you do, the way that you think, the way that you build, right? So I've loved seeing you build Big Idea Ventures into what it is now, right? Which is really the leading future food accelerator globally.
Hey, way to sort of set the bar super high so that everybody's totally disappointed after this. They'll be like, that was supposed to be a good one and it was terrible, and what the hell? We were missold something. So why don't we get people first and foremost into who Ryan Bethencourt is, and where we can take that as early as you want. We can go back to when you were, 3 years old at your mother's.
Yeah. I think it's probably helpful to start off early childhood, what inspired me. That's kind of a quick answer. My mother got me into reading. So I was dyslexic. She got me into reading science fiction. And that was really what helped me read. But in addition, it filled my head full of these really fascinating ideas about what we could do with technology and with biotechnology. And I couldn't stop thinking about that. And that's what really took me in the direction of science, right? Science just fascinated me. The fact, when I got into biology and genetics, I was like, we can be programmed. What is that? How is that? And so that really started my passion. It wasn't just biology, and it was all science, right? Physics is fascinating. Engineering is fascinating. And that's kind of what inspired the path that I took. I started in the biotechnology industry. So the pharma and biotechnology industry. I started with Pfizer. I was a pharmaceutical sales rep for a little while. I did research in the lab.
So give us, before we kind of skip through things, tell us, okay, sci-fi reading when you were what, 7, 6, 5?
Probably, yeah. I was probably reading sci-fi when I was 7 or 8. That's when I started reading sci-fi. That's the main thing I used to like to read. And it was kind of a weird thing for a kid to be reading. And there were concepts on there I did not understand. And so, but it was really interesting. Back then, for those of our listeners who, didn't grow up back then, I guess I'm dating both of us a little bit. There was a time when you didn't have internet, right? So you actually had to go find a book and look up a term. And so that's really, how I started to learn. It was what is quantum effect? What is that? Right? I'd ask people, I'd look them up in books and things like that. I used to use, I think it was even Encyclopedia Britannica and things. So, that was like a quick way of checking stuff. And so that's kind of how I learned a bit of science. And then obviously with the emergence of the web, I was able to learn much faster. And so I was tinkering around when computers kind of popped up, personal computers. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And they were connected to the web. I would do a dial-in with America Online. You just go, and then now you have access to all the world's information, which was just, mind-blowing.
Okay, so your best, I guess, some Saturday afternoon on a rainy day was sitting in the library and just sort of running around the stacks, kind of pulling.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And the library was a great place to find great science fiction too. So it was definitely the library. I used to love like the used bookstores where you could get like all these really interesting old, like Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, Robert Heinlein, which now is very old school for those that have not read Robert Heinlein. He was writing these books in the 1960s, and so it's like there weren't computers back then, and he kind of guessed something that was kind of like a computer that would help with flying, spaceship and things like that. And so one of my inspirations around like biology and longevity was Time Enough for Love, where there was like, essentially it was a breeding experiment where humans were bred for long-lived ancestors. So you would get a payment from a very rich person, this is a sci-fi book, to marry someone who also had a long-lived grandparents, basically. And so it was like this way of doing like a controlled breeding experiment to eventually extend the human lifespan to hundreds of years. And like that concept to me was just like, wait, you could breed humans to make them long-lived. And then that led me to genetics and all this other kind of weird and wonderful stuff, which we've actually proven, by the way, right? So all this longevity stuff, like you can breed worms, right? You can breed different types of animals to live longer by selecting for longer-lived animals. I was involved with a project that was called the Methuselah flies. It was a professor at the University of Irvine who bred flies that lived the lifespan of the flies was about 4x the lifespan of normal fruit flies. He'd actually bred them over a period of 10 plus years to actually live like 4 times the lifespan of a normal fly. The way he'd do that, he'd get rid of the eggs until eventually like there were only a few flies left that could actually breed, and he just repeated that many cycles. So a lot of really interesting genetic insights there that we found kind of hard to explore. So that was like the inspiration. And then kind of to fast forward, I started in the pharmaceutical industry. I did research, lab bench research. I dropped out of my Ph.D. at the University of Edinburgh. I did my master's at Cambridge, and I studied in a British university called the University of Warwick as well. I kind of stumbled into, I think, what we now do, which is kind of weird science stuff. I was part of the biohacker movement in California, and I'd moved from the UK. So I basically moved from Miami to the UK.
How does one go from multiple universities in the UK to California?
Yeah, so I moved with a clinical research company that I worked for. So actually, I worked for a company called Quintiles, and I moved and joined a company called Parexel. It was a clinical research company. So 2 clinical research companies. In the UK, I helped most of the leading biotech and pharma companies develop their drugs in early stage clinical development. So phase 1, which is called first in human drug development, which is something I still love to this day. And then I joined Parexel to help them work specifically with companies, biotech companies all across California, and help them develop their drugs. And so I was deep into the science. I headed up business development for Parexel in early phase drug development. And this was around 2010. And something kind of bizarre happened. A bunch of biotech companies started to go bankrupt, and a couple of my friends and I started to buy used lab equipment for literally pennies on the dollar. We were all kind of frustrated because we saw the rise of like low-cost tech companies, but we hadn't seen the rise of low-cost biotech companies. And so we're like, well, why not? Why can't we just build a biotech company in our living room or in our garage or something like that? So we started to buy used lab equipment. And one of my friends, John, he actually started a biotech company that was funded by Peter Thiel. it was the first biohacker company that I was aware of. He raised like $500,000 from Peter Thiel. It was the funniest story. What ended up happening?
This is now like 2010, 2012.
Yeah, this is somewhere between like 2010 to like 2014, where all this stuff started happening. And the term biohacker kind of emerged. Before then, it was just like a bunch of people doing like community science together, right? Like we would buy like used lab equipment and like try and figure out how to do basic science together, where we didn't have enough money, we didn't have enough resources, we didn't have enough equipment.
It's kind of like the computer hardware industry, where just a bunch of people going to Fry's and various other places and buying stuff as a group and sort of building things.
100%. It was very much like the Homebrew Computer Club. Yeah, and it was in Northern California too, so there was a lot of parallels. And where it got, and actually even some of the people who were part of the Homebrew Computer Club were part of the biohacker movement, which was even, I mean, a lot of them were like, there was one incredible Jay, he was a retired early Apple engineer. He was part of the Homebrew Computer Club, and he was also part of the biohacker movement. Obviously, he retired from Apple, and he was retired at that point. But we had a lot of these retired homebrew computer people helping to build the next generation of biohackers, not tech hackers, but biohackers. And so they really helped us a lot. And it was a pretty eclectic bunch of people. It was literally everyone in any, like, people who just dropped out, people who just moved to California, didn't have jobs. Back then, jobs were kind of hard to get. It wasn't that expensive to live in the Bay Area back then.
And what kind of things were the group, were the community? What kind of things were you tackling? I mean,
John started a project with Ari Gentry, who went on to start Biocurious as well with Joe Jackson. They started this project where they were actually they had HeLa cells, and they were taking their own white blood cells, putting them under the microscope and trying to understand how their white blood cells attacked cancer cells. So I remember seeing this video of their white blood cells attacking cancer cells, and it blew my mind. I was like, wait, where did you do this? It's like, oh, in my garage, right? So I was like, in your garage? And he was like, yeah. And so I was like, what do you mean you did this in your? He said, yeah, I pulled up my own blood out. I put it, I found my white blood cells, isolated them, had a cancer cell, had my white blood cells attack the cancer cell, and then like filmed it with this like really cheap video microscope that he bought from a bankrupt biotech company, because all the biotech companies back then were going bankrupt, right? It was just, the newspaper articles back then, like between 2010 and 2014, were like, this is the end of biotech, that's it, everything's bust. And it just didn't make sense to me. I was like, how can this be the end of biotechnology, right? Like, we are made of biology. It is impossible for this to be the end of biotechnology. It's just another bust cycle. And so, at the time, I was still working with big pharma and big biotech who had plenty of money because they were developing therapies for the diseases that affect us. And so it blew my mind, because I read a lot about the Homebrew Computer Club. I was a huge fan of a lot of the people and innovators that came out of that. Obviously Apple, the two Steves, Wozniak and Jobs, as well as some of the other innovators that came out of that. And so I was like, maybe this is kind of like that. And so I was one of the few people that actually had like a serious day job. And so I had money. And so I was putting my money into these things and helping people build stuff. I was part of the community of Biocurious, the early community. And then I co-founded Counterculture Labs, which was a biohacker lab in Oakland. And then I realized it was too chaotic. And so we started Berkeley Biolabs, myself and Ron, and a few other people. Ron Shigeta. Yeah, Ron, who went on to become my co-founder at IndieBio. It was myself, Arvind, Ron, and then obviously Sean O'Sullivan funded everything that we did through SOS Ventures. And so, it kind of led to this kind of, gradual, like, eventually I ended up accidentally as an investor at IndieBio, when I was really just trying to help scientists become entrepreneurs and build low-cost biotech companies. And so kind of stumbled upon that just because I wanted to see that in the world. And then at the time, and I still remember this, when we started IndieBio, people were like, oh, no, scientists don't want to become entrepreneurs. And I was like,
sorry to interrupt. So for people listening, they may not know what IndieBio is. And it might be good to give them a little bit of context.
Yeah, so I think IndieBio is still the leading biotech accelerator in the world. We started it back in 2014, the end of 2014. We kind of officially opened our doors in 2015. IndieBio has now funded probably over 200 biotech companies, everything from future food to cancer therapeutics. Andrew was my partner over on the food X side, right? As we're building and scaling. He was running the sister program to IndieBio, and so we became friends. Andrew and I became friends through that. But it was just such a wild ride, because in the early days, I would say Silicon Valley was skeptical that anything of value would come out of IndieBio. And I didn't know. I just knew that if we helped scientists become entrepreneurs, they had plenty of ideas that they just couldn't get money for to build, and something interesting would come out. I didn't actually know what it was. I thought maybe it would be like a breakthrough cancer therapeutic or something. And it turned out that the future of food, melding biology, technology, and food, was this like incredibly powerful thing. And that's really what led to us being the first investors in companies like Clara Foods, now at the Every Company, Upside Foods, which was previously Memphis Meats, the first cell-based meat company, just a whole host of other companies in the future of food space. That was about 30% of the companies we invested in. The other 70% were hardcore biotech companies. So gene therapy companies, cancer therapeutic companies, all sorts of stuff like that.
Perfect. Thanks for the background. So of all of the companies you were involved with, whether it's at IndieBio before or whatever, what's kind of most excited you as you've gone on either particular companies or what's most excited you about the companies that you've got involved with, and any in particular stand out?
Yeah, there was one that I really loved, and it was just so weird and wonderful that, I love Memphis Meats, now Upside Foods. That was really, at the time, people thought this was pure science fiction. They were like, look, it will never be commercial. There will never be cell-based meat. It's just, accept that. And, I happened to talk to Uma, who's the founder and CEO of Memphis Meats and then now Upside Foods. And he was ready. He was ready for the mission of turning this concept of lab-grown meat, cell-based meat, into a reality, right? To end the sustainability problem, the ethical problem of factory farming. And I just kind of loved the idea. And so that was on the food side, that was probably my favorite, because it was just, it was transformational. It started a global movement. I think, Andrew, you probably know the numbers, right? How many cell-based companies are there in the world now? Like, there's over 100.
Oh, there's more than that. Yeah. Good Food Institute keep a running tab, and we've made something like 12 to 15 investments in the cell-based space at this point. So, and in total companies, there's probably 200.
200.
More every day.
Absolutely incredible to me. And then obviously, the shifts we saw in plant-based space. But I think like the weird science stuff that I still am mind boggled by was a company that we funded, which was called Catalog Technologies. The premise behind it is storing digital data in DNA, right? So DNA is about a million times more data dense than a hard disk, right? And so the idea of, and I remember talking to Intel about this, they were like, yeah, we're going to run out of silicon. And I was like, what do you mean by run out of silicon? They were like, there will be a point in time in our lifetimes where we can't pull enough silicon out of the ground based on our need to store data, right? Like our consumption and need to store data is going to exceed our ability to pull silicon out of the ground. And this is like a known problem with Intel and a lot of the other memory manufacturers and silicon manufacturers. And I was like, what? And so suddenly I was like, oh, and the idea when I talked to Hunjun from Catalog Technologies was just so transformational. I was like, wait, you can store digital data. How much more data dense is it? It's like, oh, about 1 million times more data dense. Actually, Ron did the calculation, Ron Shigeta, my fellow co-founder. And so I was like, this is mind-boggling. And the company's real. Like, it's in Boston now, and they're storing digital data and DNA. Like, they actually stored, the first proof of concept was storing The Road Less Traveled, the book. in DNA, right? So the fact that you can store it and the duration of the DNA, the stability of the DNA is estimated to be about 500,000 years. We found DNA that is readable, that is 500,000 years old. And it might be longer than 500,000 years. Like it is long, like the ability to store data in DNA is actually longer than the entire lifespan of our species. Homo sapiens is about 250,000 years old. So it's kind of like we might actually have a way of storing data, an interspecies way of storing data, for the next species that comes after us, right? So that really blew my mind. I was like, okay, that's kind of mind-boggling.
It'd be kind of interesting if we were the hardware for some other sentient being, and we're just sort of a
we're just the machinery. Yeah, we're just the machinery, right?
Right. Yeah. So question for you. You mentioned you dropped into investment almost by mistake by wanting to help other scientists. You have become an investor. How do you figure out which scientists you want to back? And not. I'm guessing you don't agree that every scientist needs to be helped or needs to be given money or needs to be an entrepreneur necessarily. So how do you figure out the ones that are worth backing?
Yeah, there are many paths, right? And so, I think like a biologist, right? And so when I view, building and innovation and discovery, I don't think that there is just one path, right? Like there is a perfectly great path if you want to become a professor and publish and do blue skies research and like basic science. Like we need that, right? We need all of that, right? So, I think my perspective is not that, entrepreneurship is for everyone. It is not necessarily for everyone, and there are fundamental questions we have to answer. It's not right for entrepreneurship. It doesn't, they will lead to discoveries like CRISPR, right? Out of surprising things that, unknown unknowns. And so I have this very open mind to how we innovate, like how humanity innovates. But I do think that one of the powerful engines is entrepreneurship. And I think that for some scientists and innovators and engineers and technologists, entrepreneurship is the better path because it's a way of accelerating particularly concepts and products and services that you can get to market, that you can actually commercialize, that you have a clear path to commercialization. And so, what I look for now, I think I've invested now in over 150 companies. So as a pre-seed investor, as a seed investor with Babel Ventures, which is another venture capital group, which I joined, and then through Sustainable Food Ventures, which is a little micro fund that I started with Marilys Holm, who's my partner and my wife, and then also as an angel investor. So I've actually, in places where I have been able to cut, my checks are very small. They're like 5 to 10K because I'm not liquid. Yeah. What's that?
They haven't always been though. I mean, IndieBio, you were writing checks. After IndieBio, you were writing.
Yeah.
Checks. You've kind of run the.
I've run the full gamut, right? I've run the full gamut of cutting. When I say, my personal angel checks are very small. But yeah, I mean, I've been able to cut with IndieBio. We were cutting 200K checks. With Sustainable Food Ventures between 50 to 100K. The personal checks that I cut are 50 to 10K. Things that don't easily fit into a particular thesis. So, we both invested in Shook Meats. So Shook Meats, for those that are not familiar, is the leader in cell-based shrimp and crustaceans in Asia, and they're based in Singapore. But there was a time when no one really wanted to back them. And so that's really when I funded, Sandia talks about this and Kai talk about this, I funded them to do the fundamental research to show that they could grow the stem cells. And so my small check, which was the first check that went in, helped them rent a lab and then actually do the work, do the science. And then they were able to raise money. And then Andrew, you came in pretty much right after that, right? And backed them. And it's been a transformational story. They've actually, I think they're still the leader in raising money for cell-based meats from Asia. I have to be very specific with this.
They are the most successful cell-based company in Asia at this point. Although something Uncle Joe's from China, I think, raised 10 to 15 in the last 7 days, who are doing cell-based meat.
Okay, yeah. So that's new. So the space is so rapidly evolving. Both you and I, who stay on top of these trends, are like surprised by changes that are happening, which is amazing, right? It's exciting. But yeah, I mean, so those are the types of things, and like being able to like the first thing I look for are founders, right? Backing the right people. And so when I say that, it's like people that really want to build something. They're missionaries over mercenaries. They're not doing this for the money. They're doing this because they want to build the change in the world that they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really helps me. Outside of that, the second criteria is it credible? Is their idea credible? Are they the right person to build it, right? So if you want to make a cell-based meat company, but you have no experience with anything in biology, you've never been in a lab, you're not a credible person. You have to find a co-founder that does know their way around things. In the case of Shook Meats, both founders, both Sandy and Kai, they were scientists. They knew their way around the lab. They actually knew how to make this happen. So they were both credible and they had a purpose for doing this. And so, those are the first two things. And then you look at the markets and you see, is the market big enough? Can they raise money? But really, at that earliest stage where it's an idea stage, and now Andrew, you and I have been involved with actually, I don't know, over a dozen companies together, like helping them build and scale. And it's always about the people at the idea stage. And then we build and we support them as they continue to scale.
Absolutely. You mentioned, well, I know you've got some particularly strong points of view in terms of what a team needs in the biotech space to be successful. I think you told me that if the CSO doesn't have a PhD, then they're not really the CSO and they need to go find one.
Yeah, I mean, they could be a chief innovation officer or a COO or something like that. But yeah, I mean, then this is coming from a PhD dropout, right? Like, I know I'm kind of discriminating against myself. I would not make a good CSO, right? And so there are occasionally exceptions where someone has just been in the scientific world for a really long time. But it is a trade. Like science is a trade. It's a craft, and you have to get good at it by doing it. And so, I will not back teams that do not have a CSO with a PhD. It's an experience that I had. We tried backing at IndieBio. We tried backing biohackers, right? People who did not have conventional backgrounds who were doing the science, and they really struggled. And it's just because they didn't go through unfortunately, the back-breaking years of being at the bench, of learning why things work and why they don't, which I think makes you a great scientist.
And likewise, does a good biotech team need a business person or a non-science person in a key role, or is that not as important?
Yeah, so the CEO role is kind of this maverick wildcard role. So it's worked in many ways, right? So I've had experience with CEOs are actually PhDs themselves. They're scientists and they want to learn business, but they really want to learn business and they do great. And then I've also had the situation where someone will have a social science or liberal arts background. They're great with people, but they really have to learn the science, and they've thrived as long as they're willing to do the work of learning the science, and the business part comes kind of easy to them. They may have been in a business role, they may have an MBA, they may have so the CEO role is really very much of a maverick type role. And so with that role, I keep a very open mind. It's like anyone can be a CEO. I think in a time when a lot of the conversations around diversity, I really mean it. Like anyone can be a CEO as long as they're sharp, they can figure things out, they can think things through, and are willing to do the work, right? One of the traits I really look for as well, and not all CEOs are humble, but I look for being very humble and reasonable, because life humbles you in so many ways. And so there are plenty of CEOs that are not humble, but those aren't usually the people that I love working with.
And so that sort of chemistry is an important part to you?
Yeah, it is, because it's a commitment. It's, I still talk to every single CEO that I backed, unless we've had an argument. I don't think I've had any severe arguments with any of the CEOs that I've worked with. Pretty much everyone that I've ever helped, I'm still in touch with. And so this is a decades-long commitment. This is outside of the company. Like, these are people that I want to help and support within the company that they're in today, and within the company they'll be in the next as we build the future that we want to see in the world together. And so I don't view it as just, I'm an investor, I want just a financial return, tell me when you're returning my money. It's more like, hey, we're going on a journey together, and it's probably a lifelong journey. And so do I want to be on that lifelong journey with this person?
So I totally appreciate your mission. You and I have the same sort of objectives in that sense. I also get the impression that you love to back science and teams that are doing more and more sort of out there, outrageous, challenging, even things that haven't been proven yet, because you sort of get off on the potential of science and the potential of the companies that you're backing. Do you look for sort of an aha moment where you're like, okay, this is something special, and if this is possible, and we don't even know if it necessarily is yet, but if this is possible, then this is going to change the world, and I want to be a part of that? Is that sort of, yes, you've got the mission, but is there the sort of pushing the boundaries of what's possible? Is that part of it as well for you?
It most definitely is. And in fact, I talk a lot about entrepreneurship and, private capital, private investment, venture capital. But one of the inspirations is actually the inspiration behind the founding of the National Science Foundation, so the NSF in the US, and DARPA as well. The perspective that science is the infinite frontier. Like, for me, that is probably one of the most exciting concepts, that we don't yet know what we don't yet know. And so at the horizon, there's always something new. And so I'm always looking for that. And it never ceases to amaze me when that happens, right? Like, one example of that is, one time, this was a very long time ago, there was a founder who had basically was at Berkeley and had figured out that they could actually make food from electricity using bacteria. That's now become several companies. Like, one of the companies is Solar Foods. There are a couple of other companies that do that. Yeah. But the idea that you could use electricity, so basically photosynthesis, you basically have a solar panel, you connect it to a bacteria, and it makes food, was just so mind-blowing to me, that I was like, wow, like, this is how we feed the solar system, right? Like, that insight, and I'd never thought of that. I'd never seen it. I'd never read about it. I'd never thought about it, that you could use electricity to make food, right? And so it totally makes sense from a first principles perspective, right? Like, that's what plants do all day long. But I never thought about using a bacteria with just electricity, like a little battery on it or something, or a solar panel to make food. And so, like, I'm always looking for that infinite frontier, because I know it's there. It's always there. Yeah. So CRISPR is another example. Like, CRISPR, when that was discovered, which was an incredible breakthrough by Jennifer Doudna in her lab.
Do you want to give people a quick?
Yeah, CRISPR is the ability to do precise precision genetic editing. I won't go into too much detail because it gets kind of weird. It was a mechanism that was discovered in bacteria. Bacteria actually use it as a way of protecting themselves against things like viruses infecting them. They call them bacteriophages and things like that, or foreign DNA. And it's almost like an immune system for the bacteria. So I mean, the work that was done to figure this out was exquisite. It's super detailed. I will confuse everyone, including myself, if I try and go into it, because I need to have the scientific paper in front of me to be able to actually accurately describe it. But I mean, it was just exquisite science, and the discovery was exquisite. But it was literally a system that was in front of us the whole time. That's what's so mind-boggling. Like, it was right in front of us, but we just didn't see it because we didn't understand what it was.
Perfect Day is the same way, though, right? Where they're taking what is a process inside of a cow and converting, of converting sugars and other things into dairy inside of the cow, and they're using a very similar process, but outside of the cow.
Yep.
So, it's that nature's duplication and taking what's working and efficient from nature and doing it in new ways, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and honestly, that's, I know, we were talking kind of my investing background, but that's really what inspired Wild Earth, which was, how could, if we're talking about feeding ourselves, better, right? Humans better. And I'm a longtime animal lover. I grew up with both dogs and cats. And I know you're also a dog dad, as am I, right? There we go. And remind me.
This is Coconut.
This is Coconut. So
and he was sleeping. So right now he's both.
Coconut. Coconut's a little grumpy, haven't been woken up. So So that was really the inspiration. It's like, how can we rethink healthy food for our best friends? And so that's what led to the next phase of evolution, which was, I actually do love investing, but I love building more than anything else. And so that's really what led me to the idea of, who's the Beyond Meat, who's the Impossible Foods, who's the Memphis Meats of pet food. For nearly 5 years ago, there was no one, right? And so
now that's Wild Earth.
Now that's Wild Earth. Yeah, I mean, we're the leading plant-based and cell-based pet food company in the U.S. and probably globally. And so, our mission is really to transform the food for our pets, make them healthier, and make them more sustainable as well, but to use like science really to drive that. And so, a lot of the work that we're doing is just, absolutely fascinating to me, because there's so much to do in better food for our best friends. Pet food hasn't changed much since the 1960s. And so we haven't brought in our understanding of nutrition, 21st century science nutrition, to our pets. And so that's really the mission that I've been on. And there are actually so many insights, not just for our pets, but for us too. With dogs, we share about 350 different health conditions with our dogs. So, our dogs, they can also get obese, they can also get overweight, they can also get diabetes, they can also get arthritis, and we can help them. And by understanding the illnesses that they get and preventing them and helping them with better nutrition, we might be able to help ourselves too.
So have we been, I've always assumed that dog food is basically the worst of the worst ingredients from the animal protein, the animal factory farming industry, where they're taking the kind of worst of those animals and grinding them up and basically calling it dog food.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm sure companies like Mars would slap me for saying such a thing, because they're probably very nutritious.
Yeah.
But is that what's happening? And
yeah, it's a really interesting and deep problem, right? Because it's not like companies like Mars or Nestle want issues with their food supply chain, but they're not making the meat themselves. They're buying it from other people. And the problem is the supply chain for our pets is just not safe. It's not a good supply chain. And so some of these companies, some of these larger pet food companies, have had issues with recalls with meat that's been contaminated with all sorts of things. I mean, you can look at the FDA reports and actually see, plastics, burnt plastic getting in, euthanized animals are somehow getting in there. That basically animals that are basically put down with euthanasia drug. These are chemicals. Unfortunately, they're the same chemicals that are used for like death row inmates, as well as putting an animal down, are finding their way into the food chain, the supply chain. And this is all documented. The FDA has this documented. There have been several companies that have literally had to recall millions of units because they've had high levels of euthanasia drug. There have been heavy metals found in dog foods. There was actually a study that just came out recently that found that the byproduct in the meals that are used for pet food, the animal meals actually have high levels of heavy metals and other things that you really wouldn't want in your own food, let alone your pet's food. And so there's all sorts of issues around their supply chain, and it's primarily focused around the low quality of the meat. The irony of the whole situation is that we have so many pets in this country. Just in the US alone, we have 180 million dogs and cats. They account for 25 to 30% of the meat we consume in the US. So 25 to 30%. 25 to 30% of the environmental damage of the meat industry, 25 to 30% of the factory farms that are run go to our pets to make little brown balls of protein, which just doesn't make any sense to me. And so that's really what set off my mission to make better food. I was like, first, it's not good food. And you can see that with the fact that so many people are switching to like literally human food, right? Fresh foods. Farmer's Dog has been very successful. The reason for that is that people want something that they would eat. And so, and I'm a big fan of actually many of these companies are trying to do good things and feed animals better food. But the problem is now we have, instead of feeding them, hamburger, hot dog meat, now we have like very high quality animal protein and meat going to our pets. And so that creates even more of a challenge for our supply chain. And so I just didn't think it was sustainable. And so what we've done is we really focused on bringing plant-based, fermentation-based, and now we've just launched our cell-based meat line as well, cell-based meat research, so that we can basically replace the nutrition with a cleaner and more sustainable nutrition. And that's the start. The next steps are going to be really using more and more science to improve the health span of our pets, right? Our focus is, one example is, I'm very interested in the microbiome. We do know that centenarians, so people that are very long lived, people that live over 100 years of age, these are published studies, their microbiome is different to most normal people, right? So the bacteria that they have in their guts are different. Why are they different? Like, how do they help them? Do they help them live longer? These are open questions, scientific questions. We think that also might be the case for dogs and cats. Like, long-lived dogs and cats may have different microbiomes. It kind of makes sense. And so how do we understand that? And then how do we take that insight and design better foods so they can live longer and healthier? And so that's really our mission. And that's something I'm super excited about, because I think it has implications for them and for us.
So you've mentioned Wild Earth's plant-based, cell-based, fermentation-based.
Yeah.
Right now, today, it's plant-based.
Yeah, people can buy Wild Earth on wildearth.com. We have 8 products currently on the market. So we have 3 different treat flavors. We have 2 different sizes of dog food. We're working on some puppy and some additional flavors. And then we have 3 different supplements, particularly for older dogs, senior dogs who need some additional supplementation. But that's currently what we have in the market. And so that is plant-based and fermentation-based. And then we're working on cell-based or lab-grown meat, some people call it. And that we really think that will replace the majority of the low-quality animal proteins that are going in with high-quality, clean, cell-based meat proteins.
And so right now, your plant-based product, which is clearly marked as plant-based,
yes,
is it includes, for example, sweet potato, chickpeas, spinach, yeast.
Yeah. It's very clean, very healthy. I regularly eat it myself. A lot of people don't. They're like, "Oh, this is really gross," and it's like, I think you've had some too, Andrew, right?
I dreamt about it the other day. I every so often I remember that I've eaten dog food, and I'll dream about that experience.
Yeah, but it's so gross, the idea of eating dog food, that people can't imagine it, and like that's the whole purpose of Wild Earth. It's not gross. The stuff that we put into our food is stuff that it's not gross, right? So I have no issues eating it, and like I make that a point. I actually challenge the CEOs of the leading dog food companies to eat their own dog food. None of them responded, except I think there was one guy somewhere in the Midwest somewhere who was eating his own raw meat pet foods, and I think he got a little sick eating his own food. But like, it wasn't anyone major, right? But I saw some of the videos of him doing it. It looked pretty gross, the stuff that he was eating, but he did do it. Like, so many props to him for eating that stuff. But I'm very happy eating Wild Earth. I haven't gotten sick eating it, so I'm very happy with that.
So, I mean, a couple of things. One is, I understood you did a survey. Something like 86% of the people, of the dogs that used your product had improvements in health.
Yeah. So we had, it was about roughly 85% of our customers who've been feeding Wild Earth for 3 months or more reported some health benefit in their animals, whether that was less itching and scratching. Usually that's due to like skin allergies, often from the food that they've been fed previously. Some pet parents reported improved mobility from some of the senior dogs who had maybe some joint issues and some joint pain. It appeared to reduce the pain and allowed them to move around a little more freely. Dogs with like tummy issues or diarrhea issues reported improvements. So like all of these things together was pretty powerful. And we think, that old saying, let food be thy medicine, we think that's true. Mm-hmm. And so, we've developed Wild Earth by pet parents for pet parents.
So we've got about 8 minutes left. So I want to be cognizant of your time constraints and also mine. Couple of quick things. I don't know if you have it, but if you have a code or something for Wild Earth, I'd love to put in the show notes, etc. Any kind of code that people can use to sign up and subscribe.
For sure. And usually we have some discount for subscribers. So we usually have our standard discount. You can just find it on wildearth.com. So wildearth.com, one word.
Hey man, I wanted an affiliate link. Give me a break.
Yeah, we'll get you an affiliate link, Andrew, for sure. We'll get that. So we have another guy, Andrew, who will hook you up with the affiliate link. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you're never going to be a guy that can just focus on one thing for a decade. It's not in your nature. I totally appreciate it. You mentioned Peter Thiel backing a company that you sort of had some involvement with back in the day. I know he, for example, he and others do lots of things in longevity and areas that you're quite interested in.
Yeah.
Do you see a time when post Wild Earth, whenever that day arrives, that you'll what's the next big thing, and will it be with the backing of people like Peter and others to sort of continue to do crazy things in the world? By
the way, it already is. So Peter Thiel was actually one of our seed investors. So Felicis Ventures led our seed round,
right?
Our price seed round. That was Aiden from Felicis Ventures and his team. And then Peter Thiel came in through Thiel Capital and also Founders Fund, and he led it. And actually, one of the things that he was very excited about was the insights that we would get around longevity and pet longevity. I have a hypothesis that we can extend the healthy lifespan of both dogs and cats with better nutrition, right? Like it's not like a mind-blowing thing. It's kind of like, hey, if you eat better, you'll be healthier and you'll probably live longer. But I think I can prove that with data, and then we can really understand that. And so for me, there is almost no better system to test improvements in nutrition than our pets. They eat the same thing twice a day, right? Like they eat their kibble or their wet food twice a day. They occasionally have some snacks, but it's very different to humans. Humans don't have a controlled diet. They do have a controlled diet. So if we improve their health and we understand how we've done that, we might actually be able to bring it to ourselves. And so, for me, long term, I mean, this is a journey that's going to span, at least a decade with Wild Earth to really understand the deep biology behind this. And so for me, I'll still do stuff on the side. I always do stuff on the side, right? Like I always help other companies and whatever else. But like this journey is one that I want to drive through, because I think, is it possible to double the lifespan of our dogs? If your dog on average is going to live about 10 years, could I develop food and products that will help your dog live a happier, healthier life and double their lifespan to 20 years? That would be cool. And if I could figure that out with my team, could I do that for us? That would be even cooler, right? So these are already things that I'm thinking about.
So I see you, and this is just my personal point of view, I see you sort of guiding that journey and sort of making Wild Earth go through that process. And as a dog owner, I hope you achieve it, because I need my guy for another at least decade. But I also see you sort of driving other things as well. It's just in your nature. Whether that means you become the chairman of Wild Earth, and
Andrew, we've seen that, right? We've seen that with and this happens when you build a company, you scale a company. I mean, we've scaled Wild Earth a lot. And so, we're a commercial stage company. I was able to take Wild Earth from an idea to a commercial stage company. We now have 40,000 customers across the US. And so that's amazing. But as you scale, you fire yourself. And so I'm doing, you literally are looking for opportunities to constantly fire yourself. Otherwise you can't scale. And so I for sure see that, where I will have to find a way to fire myself from the day to day to be able to focus on some of the bigger issues. And, for sure, I would love to do what Jack does from Twitter. He runs Square and Twitter, right? Like that's amazing. Or what Elon Musk does, right? Like sometimes you can run two companies. I'd have to convince the board that that's even possible. Not yet, but maybe in the future.
So what new horizon is sort of exciting you? What if there's even something that you can just spend your time reading about while you're focusing on Wild Earth? What's the next potential horizon for you?
So I think that there are a couple things, right? And so I would say when it comes to biology, I am absolutely fascinated about the potential of psychedelics for mental health, right? Mm-hmm. And the application of psychedelics for mental health. I think that's going to be a transformational space. Probably for the next decade, we're going to see really transformational results coming from that. And I personally, I've I've invested in a company called Silo in Australia. It's one of the leading Australian psychedelics companies. And I've tried to find ways of being able to back these founders and these companies when I see them. And then separately, and I know you and I share this love for all things technology, right? So science and technology is a love for, I think, both of us. And Web3 is incredibly engaging. And Web3, it's engaging because it really is the future of consumer, right? And so I run a consumer packaged goods company, and everything is changing. Like nothing is staying the same. And so we have to understand the new trends. Like Facebook is dying. People don't consume social media in the way they used to. Web3 has changed so much. And so we have to adapt to that. And so I am endlessly fascinated with the innovation that people are coming up with Web3. I participate as a consumer. I know you do too, Andrew. NFTs, DAOs, tokenomics, all these concepts are so new and so interesting. They will change the consumer landscape, the cultural landscape, and they're already starting to. And it's something that I think we all have to embrace. And there will be something else, right? I don't know what Web 4 is going to be, but there's going to be something new around the horizon. But I mean, those two areas fascinate me.
I totally agree with you. It's a great time to be alive. Very exciting. Okay, you made me promise to get you out of here on the dot of the hour. So last thing, how do people get hold of Ryan Bethencourt? How do people get hold of Wild Earth? What are good ways of engaging with you and sort of chatting with you more?
So wildearth.com. If you have a dog, wildearth.com. We will have some cat food, but that's for next year. Getting hold of me, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, Ryan Bethencourt. And then, if you have, particularly if you have any pet related questions, you can always email me, ryan@wildearth.com. I get emails from our customers regularly. I actually share my email address on purpose so that people can tell me what's great about Wild Earth and also what's terrible. It keeps things very real. When a customer writes to me to complain that their food's, delayed and things like that. And so yeah, those are the ways to get a hold of me.
Awesome. So Ryan Bethencourt for people listening is Bethencourt. I know I spelt it wrong back in the day before I learned better. So Ryan Bethencourt, LinkedIn, Twitter, Wild Earth, WILDEARTH.com. Do reach out to Ryan or me because he's just a fantastic guy. If you spend 30 minutes with the guy, I think you'll be lucky to do so and blessed to do so. He's an amazing mind. You'll be one of those Wozniak guys in 2 decades where people will be talking about you. Oh, by the way, we should probably mention you ran away from Silicon Valley.
I did. I did. So I embraced the rise of the rest, right? So post-pandemic, I realized that the world of work is shifting. Remote first is not going away. And so I embraced it. And so we embraced it at Wild Earth. And we've actually had a lot of benefit. A lot of our team members, we asked them, we did a survey. We're like, are we going back into the office or are we not? And actually their response was like, no, we don't want to go back into the office. We want to be remote first. And so we accepted that and we're like, okay, great. So we became a remote first company. That allowed me the ability to move out to the Triangle, so Raleigh, Durham. And we now have 2 headquarters, one in Berkeley, California, one in Durham, North Carolina. And it's just great because we can really hire talent from across the US now. And we really are a US, pan-US company. We're reflective of everything in the US, all the great things in the US. And it's just been, it's been a lot of fun too, to kind of get out of the Silicon Valley headspace. And just go from a place where honestly there aren't a lot of families in Silicon Valley to a place where it's just surrounded by families, right? And so it really balances things for me. And I like being around people. I like being around different types of people, and that's really been a great opportunity to do that. There's also a lot of really interesting science and technology happening here in the Triangle too. If I were to bet, and I did bet, I think that the Triangle will be another serious hub alongside Silicon Valley and Boston and San Diego.
I think it already is. It's getting there. I know that you're a big evangelist, and I think North Carolina should get you to wear the T-shirt occasionally. I do appreciate that you're wearing a Shock Meat T-shirt today. So I should have done the same thing.
Yeah,
anyway,
totally
Ryan,
funny.
thank you so much for your time. I've gone a couple of minutes over. I do apologize.
Okay. And Andrew, one thing for everyone that's listening and watching who's made it to the end, right? And I think this is important for them. Give yourself permission because no one else will. So whatever you're thinking of building or joining or starting, give yourself permission to do it. I think you'll thank yourself for giving yourself permission.
Yeah, can you imagine those people who changed the world if they'd have stayed as postmen or lorry drivers or whatever and never actually taken the risk? We'd be so much worse off as a people. So yes, a great point. Ryan, thank you so much. I'm going to press pause, and people can now run online and start reaching out to you because I know they'll want to.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for coming along to our conversation with Ryan Bethencourt. We appreciate you. I hope you enjoy the Big Idea podcast where we focus on food. Please do like and subscribe so that we can let you know when the next podcast is. If you have questions or comments, please post them. Really do appreciate you. Please look forward to next week's podcast. And that's about it. Reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. Thanks very much. We do appreciate you coming along and listening to these. Thank you.